From Illinois Public Media, this is the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. Illinois drivers are paying more than $5 a gallon for gas this week, among the highest prices in the country. The immediate cause is war in the Middle East, a U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran that began in early March. Iran, although militarily degraded, has effectively shut down shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical choke point for global energy supplies. But the story goes well beyond gas prices. The military campaign is already reshaping the region's politics in ways that will outlast the conflict itself. We've heard from a range of listeners this morning on how you are feeling the effects of this conflict in your wallet, so to speak. Jay in Elburn owns a small bakery in Batavia and says sales dropped noticeably once gas prices spiked. He's not sure what small businesses operating on thin margins can do. Brandy in Urbana lives in a rural area, says she and her husband have no real alternatives. Their commute costs have nearly doubled. And Kevin in Elburn has been driving an all-electric car exclusively for the past year. He says while higher gas prices validate his transportation choices, he still feels the squeeze at the grocery store. We're moving fast today, I should say. If you have a question or comment, you can join us at 800-222-9455. That's 800-222-9455. To help us understand these connections, how what is happening in the Gulf is affecting us here in the 21st state, we're joined this morning by Rachel Bronson. She's a scholar at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, also a senior advisor at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which is an organization she led for a decade. Dr. Bronson, welcome to the 21st show. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
So when the Trump administration launched this war, you immediately wrote a piece raising questions about the timeline, which was 1 week, and the strategic objectives, which included regime change, military destruction, and the degradation of Iran's proxy groups like Hamas, Hezbollah. That's how it started. How do you think it's going?
Well, I think the fact that we're still talking about it and there's an active conflict going on right now, even if it's not a hot conflict with the exchange of missiles and drones, but that we've got a blockade and the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. It's not going well. The president was very clear when this began about timelines, and that's the piece that I wrote that you're referring to, which he started by saying this would be over in days. He very quickly pivoted, smartly so, to say, well, not days, but 4 to 6 weeks. But even that change was instructive. And we can talk about why the 4 to 6 weeks was so important, but he did lay that out. And we remember the Secretary of Defense was very clear about that, Secretary of State as well, 4 to 6 weeks. We're now well past that. And so given that, I would say it is not going well. It is not going as planned.
Have you been surprised by Iran's seizure of the Strait of Hormuz, which I just want to remind listeners was free and open to shipping, to global shipping, a couple of months ago?
Surprised and not surprised. So the surprise, I think anybody who would say that that was something that we expected them to do, it wouldn't be quite right. It is an extraordinary move for them to close the Strait of Hormuz. It is the biggest card that they have if they were going to be really backed into a corner. But to back up, the U.S. military and political leaders have been wargaming and planning and concerned about and recognized the vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz. This was one of the worst things that could happen. And this is a card that American planners, European planners, Asian planners all knew that they could play. So it's not surprising, and yet to see it happen conveys how significant this conflict is for the Iranians and everyone in the region.
What's the cliche? You're shocked but not surprised,
That's
maybe is the
exactly it. Thank you
yeah.
for that. I'm
Yeah.
shocked but not surprised. Thank you. And so I think if you go back to the piece that I wrote back in the first few days of this conflict, when the president put regime change onto the strategic objectives of what the United States was seeking to achieve, he facilitated the Iranians making this decision. That to me was of the men, always in conflict there's mistakes made and unexpected consequences, but to put regime change on the table as a war end, which the president did, and effectively by taking out 40 of its top leaders we had underway. But the moment he said that, it made it an existential war for the Iranian regime. He talked about, going after, later he talked about going after civilian infrastructure, all of that, but focusing on the regime made it existential. And once it became an existential fight, or a fight to the death for this regime, that made the closure of the Strait of Hormuz much, much, much more likely. And we saw the Iranians, respond almost immediately.
So the IEA has warned that energy markets could remain undersupplied through October, even if the conflict were to end soon. I mean, can you talk about what goes into a forecast like that and how you're thinking about, you know, what the new timelines for this could be?
Sure. Um, the reason the International Energy Agency puts out forecasts like that, and in some ways it's conservative, quite frankly, is they're assessing damage to facilities. They're assessing what kind of storage and stockpiles countries have, and also importantly, how long it takes for the energy supplies in the Gulf to reach ports that to deliver their supply. So even assuming that this conflict ended tomorrow, there was some sort of deal, and the US relaxed its blockade, the Iranians said that, it's now open for transit, everybody was safe, the insurance companies believed them, and everything was operating. you, we still have several factors that are guarding against a return to normal. And the most obvious one is just how long it takes to move, to transit this cargo. And it takes weeks to get from the Persian Gulf to ports in China, where considerable amount of energy goes, right? The Iranians, for Iran, China is their largest export market. Um, and so it can take it takes about 6 weeks when things are going well. So one of the things that has been cushioning markets, if you can believe it or not that they're cushioned, but one of the things that's been cushioning it is that it's that when the conflict began, there was a lot of storage on the open seas. It was called a loose market. There was a lot of excess capacity. There was a lot of full tankers floating around. There was a lot of offshore storage being held. Countries were kind of flush. It was a loose market. And so that meant it would take up to about 6 weeks to really deplete those reserves that were already out there and available. And that's why the president's timeline of 4 to 6 weeks was so important. And that's why you see the ceasefire come into effect about 6 weeks, almost to the day of the conflict. It was the idea that for those 6 weeks, all the surplus uh, oil and that was on the seas, the gas that was on the seas, everything that was moving could kind of make up the difference. But once you get past that, we start depleting those resources. And now there's nothing coming behind it, or very little coming behind it. And so that's why we've seen countries led by the United States put, to release the strategic reserve, petroleum reserve, we can talk about. But that's why the IEA would say this is going to be at least to October. Now, very quickly, that doesn't account for the destruction of facilities that we've seen. And so Qatar is the best example. Qatar, which provides a significant portion of global LNG, liquefied natural gas, their key plant was hit by Iranian missiles, and their estimation is going to take 3 to 5 years to get that back up and going. So we've got a long kind of wait for this to really push it through the system, and I've described it as like a snake that's eaten a mouse, that it has to work itself through the whole supply chain, and right now it's going to take a long time to get back up and running.
Just about 5 minutes left in our time together. I'm old enough, I can remember when I first started driving, which was in the 1990s. Gas was less than $1. I can still remember the shock I felt the first time I saw a 2 as the first digit on a gas station sign. It was a Shell station in Bolingbrook. I don't know why. It's stuck in my head all these years. Now that seems quaint. Are we going to just have to get used to 4s and 5s and where does it end? 6s, 7s on our, as the dollar digit on the gas station sign?
Right. So I think for where we are now, those 5s are so shocking. 4s are disappointing and 5s are shocking. So there's some, I wouldn't say good news, but there's some ways that we can begin to think our way out of it. First of all, the U.S. Has been buffered by this extraordinary change in our own energy positioning globally. The shale revolution that happened, and the fracking, sorry about that, and the innovations around fracking, and the horizontal drilling, and all of these changes that have contributed to this kind of shale revolution has moved the United States from a important energy actor and a net importer to a net exporter. That means that we are not immune because pricing is set globally, but we are certainly buffered. And so we feel it in terms of inflationary pressures, in terms of what we're seeing at the pump, but not as significantly as the rest of the world. And that will continue for the foreseeable future. The extent to which we can reduce our dependence on fossil fuel, that will also help us. So you had the reference to one of your callers who is using an electric car, and that was a perfect example of he is benefiting from the fact that there's an energy transition underway that he is part of, but he's still feeling those global prices, especially at the supermarket. So to the extent to which we can continue to diversify our energy mix and pursue all forms of energy inputs, we will benefit from.
Do you think, in just a few minutes left, but do you think, in the 70s, there was this move to smaller cars, or at least that's what I understand the history to be of that time because of the oil crisis. And yet, and then we had high prices during the second Gulf War in the early 2000s. And yet people were still buying Hummers, and they're still buying, Ford F-250 jacked up sort of pickup truck gas guzzling things. How long do you think it has to stay up? Prices have to stay up to really, create like a secular change in American vehicle culture and fuel consumption and that sort of thing?
It's a great question, and when we compare to the 70s, the American economy is significantly more energy efficient than we have been in the past. And that's a real tribute to individual decisions, corporate decisions, government decisions, policies made to reduce the amount of energy required to do anything. So there's a positive there to the extent to which the trend continue. What concerns me a little bit right now in terms of American energy policy is this real focus on doubling down on carbon, on gas and oil. We have it in considerable amounts, and that's beneficial to us. But I would like us to be aggressively pursuing an all of the above strategy, which includes renewables and federal policies advancing renewables, as well as nuclear. That's a big issue here in Illinois. We are a nuclear superpower. 55% of our energy comes from nuclear power. The governor has made some important changes to regulations to support a nuclear base. Anything that we can do to diversify rather than doubling down on gas and oil would be beneficial to the United States. And if we can keep doing that and keep working towards our meeting new and more aggressive energy efficiency standards, we will be protected. And those swings will hit us less hard. We're seeing some of that if you compare us to the rest of the world, but we still have a long way to go. And what concerns me is current policy, which is just focused on, seems to me, on oil and gas as as our path out.
Yeah, we've left behind all of the above. Rachel Bronson is the Lester Crown Non-Resident Senior Fellow for Energy and Geopolitics at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. That would be a great tease for a future conversation. I hope we can have you back. Thank you so much for being with us today here on the 21st Show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
More to come after a break. This is the 21st Show. Stay with us.